No one ever gets married with the intention of splitting up. It is, after all, a commitment, through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, and other versions of the same thing. But sometimes things don't work out. People find out that they're not compatible, or there are other factors at play, things that can't be reconciled. And then the statement, whatever's yours is mine, and what's mine is also mine, becomes a problem. Divorce is a painful, often messy experience for everybody involved. But it is a reality that must be faced head-on as well. And there are several major financial implications too. This is Moneywise, and I'm Alex Matthew. On today's episode, we're talking about how couples should plan their finances and what to do in the event of a separation. I'm joined today by Rohit Shah, founder and chief executive officer of GIR Financial Planners, and Kanupriya Kejriwal, advocate of divorce and family law. Thank you so much to the both of you for taking the time. Absolute pleasure having you. And this, I think, is an important conversation to have. First of all, I need to understand there is anecdotal evidence, Kanupriya, that there are more divorces happening. And I know of people that are going through this as well. Is this fact?
More divorces in the recent past? Yes, I think so too. It's not just anecdotal. It is true, maybe, I mean, a part of it has to do with the financial independence that now couples are attaining. It's not just a society where only the man is working and bringing the money home and that's his role in the sort of family unit. That's no longer obviously the case. So both members of the couple are now financially independent, which obviously leads to a certain amount of financial power, which gives you the ability to walk out, or at least to want to have the discussions of walking out if things are unbearable, or if the marriage is not hunky-dory and things are not going the right way. Earlier, that was difficult because the question of where will I go was very prominent. Now that doesn't really exist.
There are more nuclear families now.
Correct.
I don't know if you have insight into this, Rohit, in conversations that you have. I know that you advise a lot of families, a lot of couples as well. Do you see splits?
Yeah, I do see a very worrying trend that I think there's a lot of increasing trend about divorces, settlements, and I think the good thing is that there is an awareness about one's own finances. Married couples are very conscious, they're planning. But I think when you look at a good old Indian traditional approach of tolerance, living with difference of opinions, I think that is changing very fast.
Okay. So, there are counter arguments to that as well, Rohit, and I think a lot of people would say, to counter that a lot of things were buried under the surface or maybe pushed under the carpet, and those things are not being tolerated. They shouldn't be tolerated because ultimately, there are extreme examples of everything, but then abuse should never be tolerated. And so we're talking about every instance of divorce, and I guess that is important to address as well. There are multiple ways to go about this, Kanupriya, and some worse than others. Obviously, there is an amicable settlement, which is good for everybody, and a problematic, painful divorce, which is not good for anybody, acrimonious. How do these two things look? Can you describe the two of them?
Okay, so I think a good settlement or a good amicable divorce is one, I always tell my clients, is one where you both walk away from the situation, walk away from after the divorce, feeling that you've compromised, feeling that, I could have probably had a better settlement, or I could have probably managed to do this at a lower number. When you both feel like that, it's a good settlement. Where it's not actually a complete win-win. It is more where both of you have accepted that, this is the financial arrangement that has been worked out. It's average. It's workable, but it's not great. Where both of you feel a little uncomfortable, that's probably a good, healthy settlement. Having said that, when it's an amicable settlement, there is no real intervention of the court in Indian law. It's not that in Indian law, the courts do not intervene when you're settling it amicably. They don't dictate the percentage. They don't dictate how much should or should not be offered. A marriage can settle with an alimony of 5 rupees literally to 5 crores to 50 crores to 500 crores.
This is one-time payment?
It can be one time, it can be monthly, it can be biannually. It's all determined on the basis of what the couple decides, of course with the assistance of legal advisors. It can even be a payout that happens gradually over a period of
But
time.
who pays?
Usually the husband. It's not that the law is completely expecting just the husband to pay. There are certain laws in the country, for example, the Hindu personal laws, which also expect the woman to pay if she is earning a higher amount than the male. But usually it is the men that are sort of paying the alimony because of a number of factors. At the end of the day, if a couple, let's say it's a couple that is similarly aged, their life trajectory will go on in a way that there probably will be a disparity in their earnings, because let's say there are children, there will be a little amount of setback that a woman's career may take intentionally. Setback may be too harsh a word, but intentionally she may decide to spend a little bit of time towards other aspects. So I don't think there is always an equal...
Yeah, and well documented also that there is still a lot of ground to cover in terms of gender parity in terms of payment, right?
Exactly.
But okay, I want to come to you on this one, because ultimately some aspects of what we speak to with you, Rohit, will dictate how the rest of the conversation is done as well. In your experience, when you speak to couples and the way that they plan finances, of course, there are situations where there's one single earner, but more often than not, now we have two people that are earning. In your experience, do people save in one account to do so? Because I've heard a lot of instances where one person out of the couple does the expenses and the other saves for both of them, and so assets effectively are created by one individual, and that's not necessarily the best thing to do. How do people normally do this in your experience?
So that's a challenge, Alex, and we have to look at this as a pool of money. And when there is a household, different families have a different rule. So for example, a couple might say that, we will put all the expenses from husband's account, and he has some surplus which is getting saved. And from the spouse, the wife's account, there's a minimal spend. So usually she might end up doing a maximum, saving. We've also seen the cases other way around. So let's say where there is a joint account that both husband and wife are managing, and the wife after the divorce feels that the investment which were made from the joint account that money belonged to her because the husband was, let's say, going through a transition, she didn't have income, and that money belonged to both of them. So money doesn't have a color. It's very difficult to, track it over a period of years that, this is exactly the contribution, by X and Y. And it's very difficult to sort of, keep it, because it's a bucket as a family, and sometimes somebody's buying home.
And there was a conversation about a billionaire that went through a divorce where, the point that was being made at the time was that his wife could take him for a lot of money because he couldn't have done what he did when he started his company in the garage of his home, that not his home, rather her home. He couldn't have started that business if it wasn't for her. So there's no monetary value to that.
And I actually completely agree that sometimes I completely agree with what he said, that what couples end up doing is one person is saving and one person is spending, and then when things go sour, it's okay, but these savings are joint. No, these savings are just mine. So that is a big problem. We actually always advise couples who come to us before getting married that it's better to keep the finances separate.
Couples come to you before getting married?
Sometimes when they want to enter into a prenuptial agreement, they do.
This is surprising to me because, so, and I was going to ask you about prenuptial agreements. Why don't we address that right now, in fact, since it's come up? How do these work? Is there legal binding?
No, they are not legally binding. Prenuptial agreements are not legally binding in India. But having said that, we do encourage couples to enter into a prenuptial agreement more and more now, especially if there is financial disparity between both their income levels. Because it may not be legally binding today, but in a court of law, it will have some kind of persuasive value. Which means, God forbid, the marriage has broken down. You can go to court and say that this was the intent of the parties at the time that they got married. This is how they wanted their assets to be split up.
Which court? You would go to family court?
You'd go to family court. Yes.
So how would that look? How would that document be
It will completely then depend on the judge as to how much weightage the judge then wants to give to the intention of the parties at the time of marriage. But I have seen some judges do give it some amount of weightage, and some judges absolutely reject it, saying they're not legally binding. Why should I even look at the document?
Yeah.
But it's more like a memorandum of understanding that parties can enter into.
And I guess you could also remind the parties of the fact that they did sign that agreement when before they got into it. So there was an intention at that time to say that, oh, you know, if things don't work out, this is how we go about the split.
Exactly.
But how do you normally construct that prenup? What is an ideal prenup? Is there one?
No, there is no ideal prenup.
Okay.
It'll basically be that you list down the assets that you have today and you decide the proportion, if any, of the split of each of those assets, if you want to. And you decide of whatever you end up earning in, say, 5 years of marriage, or if the marriage breaks when the marriage is at 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. I would say a good prenuptial agreement should have a bifurcation of all of that. That if we decide to part ways at 5 years, we'll split our assets then in this way. 10 years this way. If children, this way.
That's
no children this way.
Oh my God.
We need a mind map.
You say in the financial world, right? You can't plan the next 2 weeks of how the markets are going to go.
Can I have a joke here? You know, I read somewhere says I got wealthy the old-fashioned way. How? So, you know, just before her death, I was very nice to my aunt.
Oh God. Very dark, I must say. But having said that, we were talking about the ideal, right? Because you said that things are done in a certain way, ultimately what people are comfortable doing. Is there an ideal way to plan your finances as a couple?
Yeah, sure. I think a good amount of clarity and, you know, like Kanupriya pointed out, you know, trying to keep it clear, separate, two different boundaries, you know, my money, your money, joint money is a very good way. And, you know, see, if you look at it, a lot of these are fights related to money. And, you know, when a money brings in a bad energy, it creates a bigger problem. So when the couples have thought through about important money decisions, a lot of these fights can be avoided. You know, how much they want to spend for children education, how much they want to do it for their house, you know, how much money they want to keep it aside for discretionary spends. So I think these conversations proactively can help them to avoid, you know, things getting into a, you know, bigger issues later on.
So spend some time at the start of your relationship to talk about long-term goals that you might have. You know, do you want to travel every year? Do you want to see new places? If that is not being fulfilled, then that can be cause for acrimony down the line. Okay, so very important. How many children do you want to have? That can also be a very important, and it's not just an emotional decision anymore. It is in fact a financial decision and can be problematic down the line. Okay. When it comes to the creation of certain assets, and this is what I want to get both of your opinion on, especially in the state of Maharashtra, I'm not really familiar with several other places, but there are advantages to having the woman as the first owner or the owner of property, because you pay lower stamp duty. When you go for a mortgage, you have lower interest rates that the banks offer, and so that's what a lot of people tend to do. Can that be a problem down the line is a question that I have. Rohit, you want to take that first? Is this very prevalent, first of all, and is it necessarily a bad thing?
It depends, like, you know, I think I've heard in the north side, Delhi had that practice. Earlier, Maharashtra had something like that. So it is not seen much now, but it does keep coming in. And I think the way to address that is that, you know, just to save a few percentages of stamp duty, we have to really think about, is it really worth it? And a single holding can create a lot of issues. I mean, ask any, you know, person who has lost a spouse, and, you know, when how much effort it has gone into do an estate planning, succession, getting transmission of all assets. That person will tell you whether that saving few percentages of stamp duty was worth or not. You know, in some cases, the decision is already taken. It's already a, you know, a single owned property. I think the least you can do is that have a proper estate planning documents in place. And the basic document is will. Like if you look at, you know, I think Bombay, Bangalore, probate is compulsory.
Yes.
So that's where at least having a will can save such situation.
Okay. You want to come in on that?
I do think that it happens. I do think couples, sometimes I think there is a little bit of an advantage taken of that, because if during the course of the marriage, property is in the name of the woman and she's actually not financially contributed towards it, it's not even her matrimonial house, which means it's not the house where she has been residing after her marriage, but it is a property that is in her
investment,
name.
Right.
Yeah, that was bought for investment, probably solely with the funds of the husband, and then bought in her name. it's not really a disadvantage, it's not really taking advantage, but think about it. It will be a situation where, as a divorce lawyer, I will say this property anyway belongs to the female. It anyway belongs to my client, assuming the female is my client. So what is the alimony that she is going to receive over and above this property? This is something that belongs to her. It's in her name. You're not giving it to her. So you shouldn't include it in the divorce settlement. I may, as a divorce lawyer, may say that. Of course, when we settle the matters amicably, all of this would come into the fold to decide the overall settlement.
Sure.
So you would consider that, okay, this property is already in her name.
Yeah.
What else will she get? This is valued at XYZ. So we'll take that into account.
But in this case, the argument to that could be a proof of payment of for the house, where the husband in this case would say that, I have clear details of the payments that are made to the bank.
Yeah, but as you said in the beginning, in matrimonial cases, how can you sort of then ascertain her contribution?
Right, you can't delineate.
You can't really show how she's contributed. She has, but she has in the relationship. The assets have been built as a unit, as a family unit. She may have made other sacrifices to help him buy that.
Very important point.
So the courts recognize that.
No, and the opposite is also true. Let's be very clear about that, because the opposite is also true, right? Where the man is claiming, oh, you know what, I also contributed to the house that we both bought together, maybe to a lesser extent, but I did. Okay, so I also want to talk about the amount of time that it takes to get a settlement, to get a divorce. It's not easy. Can you talk about the process involved and the way in which to do it through court, because court tends to be very long, right?
Yes. If it is a contested divorce, an acrimonious divorce, anywhere between 3 to 5 years. That is also a conservative number. It can even go on for longer.
3 to 5 years. And so what are we talking about that happens during this process? Can you talk us through it?
So you file for divorce on a particular ground, usually say mental cruelty. And you may also make an application for interim maintenance, which means certain financial arrangements to be made during the course of litigation. Because, I mean, it may be possible that one person, usually the woman, is not earning or is earning very little. So she needs some money for those months till the litigation goes on.
Does it matter what community you come from?
No, you can apply for interim maintenance in whatever community that you come from. And you apply for that. So then that is heard first by the court. Then the court goes into trial and going into your mental cruelty and whether or not your divorce gets proved. Irrespective, the maintenance proceedings will happen prior. So contested about 3 to 5 years, amicable divorce, that takes less. It takes a maximum of about 6 months in court. But the settlement talks between lawyers, or say between families or between the couple, happen prior to going to court, which can, in my, I think in my understanding, I've seen maybe about 6 months, about a year to work out a really good, healthy settlement. And then you go to court and simply just file the settlement arrangement.
Rohit, please come in case, because I'm learning a lot of new things today. These things never occurred to me. The follow-up to that is, we just had a conversation last week about Hindu undivided family, and a lot of people are getting into that kind of a structure with their assets, and perhaps you can also come in on this from the perspective of transfer of assets from one generation to the other, because it is more lucrative from a tax perspective to have whatever asset that is transferred from father to son or otherwise in that HUF structure. Is it problematic when divorces occur in that HUF structure?
So what happens is, a wife can have a claim only on what belongs to the husband.
That is what I meant.
Yes, not on what belongs to the in-laws. This is the simple way of putting it. Of course, there are other ways where you can sort of try and stake a claim in family property, but that is through filing domestic violence proceedings. It's separate. But the law is very clear. The assets that are considered are what belongs to the couple, not what belongs to their families. So only stuff that has already been transferred in their name, not future inheritance, something that is already on their books today, comes into the fold.
Rohit, you want to come in on this? Because I know that there are a lot of people out there that are contemplating this kind of a structure purely for tax reasons. Is it a good idea? Especially in the event that a split takes place, it becomes very messy, right?
It does, Alex. And if you think about it, there are so many other situations. And I'll add to the HUF part. Imagine a business family, and most businessmen do not prefer to buy properties in their name. They do not build assets, and then it's easier to build these assets in the name of the spouse.
Yes.
And that is where when you have an HUF property, which is actually not an individual, it's a joint family property, or when you have a business money which has been sort of diverted into an individual name just for the sake of not having an asset in a particular name, then it becomes even more difficult, because end of the day, it's a joint purse in the family, and it becomes very difficult to segregate. And this is where exactly it leads to this dispute in terms of what is mine, what I still need to deserve and get it. And I think this 3 to 5 years, that's really a sort of a long period. I've heard that if there is a joint petition with the consent, then it can be like a 6 to 8 months.
That's 6 months,
right?
Okay.
But I think what is really sort of ending up, and I think if you notice, Alex, this is a transition situation. Now think about the people who are involved. Look at the financial stress. Look at the amount of money that is being spent.
Yes.
Look at the impact. Imagine if somebody is working, shifting the city, changing the career. In case if this is, let's say, 1 or 2 child, and one of them is...
That is the point. I was coming to that, and I think you've brought up a very important, perhaps the most important thing, right? Because what happens when there are children involved, there is also the element of custody that comes into play. How is that dealt with? Because often this is the most acrimonious issue, right?
Custody?
Yes.
So it's determined by the court. If it's going to be an acrimonious divorce, it's determined by the court. Having said that, if the children are younger in age, usually the custody goes to the wife, the mother.
Okay.
Unless there are certain circumstances which make it necessary for it to go to the father, but otherwise, younger the child, mother is considered to be the primary caregiver, but a lot of access is given, a lot of parenting time is given to the father.
So effectively it's joint, it's shared time.
Yes. What we in fact encourage in a settlement is that there is complete joint custody, which means all important decisions of the children
Are taken jointly,
such as health and education. Those are the most important decisions in a child's life.
Yeah.
So those are taken jointly. Day-to-day decisions can be by the parent with whom the child is presently residing. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to weigh in on this? Obviously, this is how the legal course is taken, but from the perspective of finances and managing it, there are so many elements here, right? In terms of, one, of course, education, paying for health, but also transfer of assets that are created. Ultimately, this is your child that you're talking about, right?
Correct. So I think, this changes the whole, your budget, your financial plan, Alex, because see, what is happening is that a family living together, managing the child, now there are 2 houses, 2 establishment, 2 set of cost, and now, both have to jointly support the child. There's an inefficiency, the spouse may have to take an additional insurance cost, they may have to take additional investment targets. So I think it just blows the whole financial plan. And when there is one money at a family level, it's very easy to manage, prioritize, deprioritize, and based on how situation is changing. But now what's really happening is there are different buckets. And now it's a legal obligation, let's say, for a son with the wife and a husband staying away. But the husband has to make sure that he takes certain insurances, he has certain investment targets, and then it puts the whole family's finances just completely out of the plan.
Speaking of that, there is ultimately the issue of alimony that has to be decided. And I know that you broached the topic when you spoke about it can be anywhere between 5 and 5 crore. How is that decided? And usually, so would it be the court that comes in and says this is the alimony that is paid?
So if it's amicable, it's decided between the parties, lawyers, family members, etc. And there is no rule. But if it is a contested divorce, again, there is no fixed formula under the law. But going by my experience, I would say usually the courts give something like 1/5 to 1/3 of the difference in the two people's income. So to explain, like if the husband is earning say 100 rupees, the wife is earning 20, so the difference is 80. So 1/3 to 1/5 of 80.
Okay.
Somewhere like that is where the number would fall, depending on a lot of factors such as how many children, what was their standard of living when they were living together, do they have any other dependents like parents, etc. What are they earning? What is their earning capacity if they are not earning? So today you may have taken a sabbatical, but if you were to go out and get a job, what would you make?
What if there's parity in earning?
Yeah, so that is why I said that. That is why I said they look at, if you're earning 20 as a wife and the husband is earning 100, then 80 is the difference, right?
Yeah.
So then 1/3 to 1/5 of 80.
Sure.
Is,
No, what I'm saying, in a situation where there is exact parity, is it okay, or is it likely that the court will come and say there's no need for an alimony, or is there always an alimony?
the courts may say there is no need.
There's no need.
Yeah, the
Okay.
courts may really say there is no need. It's
Okay.
not always given. It's not a given that, okay, alimony is 100%, let's just decide how much.
Sure.
It's not like that.
Okay.
And I think that's where, Alex, it's important that, both the sides have a reasoning here.
Yeah.
And I think, the bigger challenge here is that the living together itself is a question. That's the very reason they're taking a divorce.
Yeah.
And then to expect them to have that maturity to sort of think broader, think in the interest of children, think not jeopardizing somebody's finances is difficult.
Yeah.
But that's where when the both sides can think in reasonable terms, then it can help to impact some of the costs. Because when you think of the broader terms, what is really happening is that, and this is typically a woman problem, that handling emotions, the stress of the transition becomes difficult.
Yeah.
And this is and a transition needs to be dealt separately.
Yeah. Again, I think it's very difficult to paint things with a broad brush. There will be so many conditionalities
Yeah, so I actually beg
involved.
to differ, because what ends up happening is couples are able to put their emotions aside, in fact, especially when there are children involved. And they are able to come up with, at least, they look at financial planning for the child's educational future
Together.
and other future together.
Yeah.
So they make a sort of a table where they decide, okay, if the child goes abroad, we are expecting it to be roughly this much. If the child decides to study a professional course in India, then we're looking at this much.
But the problem arises when there is a difference of opinion in terms of what is
Absolutely.
required.
Abroad
and a
yes.
joint agreement is a great scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A joint clarity on what they
But
want
that's
to
what
do.
that was a point that you were making.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Ultimately,
Correct.
that was
that's
the
a
point.
tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough
It
one.
is a tough one, but it is an ideal situation. You've
Absolutely.
described what an
Yes.
acrimonious divorce can look like, and as not something that anybody wants.
It's not desirable.
All right, so I think that we've covered the salient facts and features here, and we've covered several scenarios as well. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Not the most comfortable conversation to have, honestly, but an important one to have nonetheless. Hope that this is something that gave you food for thought at the very least. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is NDTV Profit.